You know, the decision to become an investment advisor representative, an IAR, is no small decision for you to make. One of the challenges, though, is what happens the day after you pass the test? What are the things that you need to be doing to set yourself up for success? On today's episode of The Complete Advisor, we have a fantastic conversation with Eric Barr, VP of Business Development at GeoWealth, on what those 5 things are that you should do the day after you pass your test. You do not want to miss this episode. We're talking about the steps that somebody who is successful now as a non-registered person. So they're doing non-registered annuities, they're doing life insurance, they're doing long-term care, they're working with clients. So they know how to get in front of people. They know how to have conversations. They know how to close business. They're running a practice. So we've set the table that these are folks that are going to do something with their IAR. So let's talk about maybe the first 5 steps that you think, from your experience,
sure,
that you think that a person needs to do. So one of the things we were talking about off camera was the importance of refining a process. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I even going to back up one step. I think something we see very often is you have to reestablish your framework right out of the gates, because this is a completely new story.
Yeah.
This is a completely new world. You're taking a world that was on a certain track and you're adding a whole new track to it. Mm-hmm. And it does take a minute to wrap your head around. You've been very, very successful. In a lot of cases, I'm not saying every single person that sells insurance, as an example,
sure,
sells against the markets, but we do see that a lot. We see that, hey, why would you be over here when you could be over here and it's a little bit safer and this is a little bit more dangerous? So when you think of that collision of ideas now, you've got to reframe everything.
I think, to go along with what you're saying, I think the reframing of the brain too, not just in what you're offering to clients, but I know that personal experience, that once you get those licenses and all of a sudden there's a moment where, and I don't want to scare people, but maybe I do want to scare people, because this is a huge honor to handle somebody's money, and it's a huge responsibility. But when that first time when you realize, like, oh, what I might recommend to you and your family might not work, and you could actually lose money off my recommendation.
That's a fear you've got to get over really quickly. Yep. And another piece is, I may have told you something in the very near past that's very different from what I'm about to tell you. So how do you shape that story? And part of that is the truth. You've become a fiduciary. By getting your 65 and becoming an IAR, you are now a fiduciary.
Define it.
Your responsibility is to put the client first.
Yep.
All the time. So that's a big role, and that's an important shift. And your role just expanded, and now you have a bigger toolbox, is the way I say it.
Yep.
So your toolbox just got tenfold bigger, and you've got more you can put a person into to get them into a position of success. So it's a total rewiring of how you're looking at things. You've got to really bring in the whole universe, which sounds daunting, but there are easy ways to start stepping into it that aren't bad.
So that has got to be one of the first things. Is how often do you see when you're working with somebody where you see that person that just became an IAR, they just passed their test, and how do you get them past that paralysis by overanalysis? Because all of a sudden, it just like you said, it's like, well, before I had these handful of products that I was doing, and all of a sudden it's like, poof, here's your choices.
It's the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yep.
So you do have to jump in. You have to kind of fearlessly jump into this landscape and also understand you have resources behind you. So you're not out there. It may feel like you're out on an island all on your own, but you have not only teams here at Creative that our job is to help you get on your feet. You have a community of advisors that have walked this walk, especially in this house in Creative.
Yep.
Almost all of our advisors have been down this path before you and know exactly what you're about to go through. And it's let's not sugarcoat it. It's challenging at first because you really have to rework everything. But the payoff is this whole new revenue stream, and I would argue very rewarding, because as a fiduciary, you're pulling everything together, not just one piece, whether it's just the investments or just the insurance. You're pulling it all together, which is pretty unique.
When you get access to all these different options, you need to have tools and you need to have tech. So how important is that? What steps does someone need to take there?
To me, the first step, because you have to develop a story, you have to believe the story wholeheartedly that you're developing. So I call it developing your investment philosophy. What is your investment philosophy? And it's different for everybody. And just a couple of quick examples. So,
Actually, define it first. Simple words like for me, as a simpleton.
I think an example probably better defines it. A lot of folks are very loyal to U.S. investing only. That's part of your investment philosophy. That is not a right or a wrong answer. But if I come to you as an advisor and I say, hey, that's crazy. You should always be including fixed income. You should always be including international investments. You should always be including all these things. That may not sit right with me as an advisor, and it doesn't fit my investment philosophy. I think one of the real keys to being successful with anything, whether it's insurance, investments, anything, is you always want to know, A, that you believe wholeheartedly what you're putting forward is fits your belief system, but you also want to know when that same belief system's not going to work. Because everything, I don't care what the product is or what the solution is, you have to know what the worst case scenario is. So if I'm a U.S. only investor and I'm only going to put people in U.S. large cap equity as an example and couple that with a fixed indexed annuity, very common, but I better know what the downside is with that U.S. piece ahead of time. So I'm not hit with a question that I don't have the answer to.
When you say that, one of the things that I learned through the years of being registered is that, and this is just life lesson stuff too, there's no one thing that fits everything.
Correct.
And then every single thing, especially, I think you really learn this when you start looking at the different risk categories and stuff. Excuse me. But that everything, no matter what it is, no matter how awesome it is, it has a pro and it has a con. Because there's nothing that's 100% pro. Like
the one question I ask every investment manager is, when will this let me down?
Yeah.
What's a bad day for this strategy? I need to know that as an advisor because I've got to be ahead of that.
Exactly.
So when I see that bad day coming and the client, I can get ahead of that conversation. Hey, we see this coming. This might feel a little rough for a minute here, but we're going to get through this.
Yeah.
So understanding that in any product.
One of the things that definitely changes is, let's talk tech. And there's the cool that, tech stack just sounds so awesome to say.
Sounds cool.
But when we're talking about the ramping up of the tech that someone needs to have when they become registered, because before you can depend upon, you can get the tech support that you need in the non-registered side from the carriers. They'll run things for you. You can run the different the IMOs like Creative. We have tools. But when you become registered and all of a sudden that world opens up, the tech requirements, the tech challenges ramp up as well. Talk us through that side of things.
Yeah, a little bit. The good news is as you make that transition, you maybe are already using some of the technology that's required to become a holistic planner. So for example, you might use Retirement Analyzer. That actually does a really nice job of planning. I'd say there's a couple critical things to get organized on the tech side. You have to be running some sort of financial plan. It doesn't have to be complex. You can get very complex. You can get way into the nitty-gritty of it, but you need to be able to showcase to somebody how these pieces work in concert.
Absolutely.
So that's things like Retirement Analyzer, e-money. You want to get your feet into something that fits your style. So again, it doesn't have to be complicated.
That's a good point, because there is a ton of software options out there, and it does. Somebody asked me one time, "What's the best one?" It's like, well, it depends on
100%.
what fits you. It's just like shoes. I don't like Nikes because they're too thin,
Right.
but they look cool.
E-money, deep end of the pool.
Yep.
Right capital, kind of middle of the pool. Not too complex, not too simple. And then there's a bunch of stuff that's what I'll call more shallow end of the pool. There's the old-fashioned pad and paper. That
Probably sells more than anything. But
I know incredibly successful advisors that still use a yellow pad, but you have to be able to show the person across the table from you how these pieces work with one another in concert and are going to get them to their goal with the least amount of risk as possible.
well, and there's one other person that you may have to show your work to, and that's an area on the regulatory side. We're going to go. I know I crossed it off, but the consideration of making sure your documentation requirements, your compliance requirements. Before, if you're non-registered, you're dealing with the insurance department of the states that you're doing business in. And now, not only from a consideration of how you're doing things, you have still have the insurance departments because you're still going to be doing those type of products. But now you add another layer on, and you're a fiduciary.
Yeah. Documenting is your lifeblood, I think, or your savior, I should say, your lifeline, not your lifeblood. It is really important. Things do change. They do amp up a little bit, but if you take care and if you work with your compliance department, a lot of people think compliance departments are the enemy. In our world, you should be looking at your compliance department as your best ally. So anything they're telling you they're telling you not because they want to tell you no. They're telling you that because when you get audited, if you get audited, they want you to be ironclad protected.
Let's talk CRMs for a second. Let's deviate over there then. What do you see folks using?
Redtail seems to be
they're big.
the biggest and most popular. There are others out there. Wealthbox is an example, but I see most using Redtail. It's the same thing as the planning software. I find that people gravitate towards different CRMs. All you really need it for is that documentation piece and obviously contact information. And the more you want to leverage it, the better. So when you're looking at CRMs, also look at what they integrate with.
Oh, good point. Because, so on the non-registered side, I think pretty much everybody who's listening to this is familiar with Firelight.
Yep.
The e-app, and one of the cool things is there are like Redtail integrates, so it pulls client. Not a promotional consideration paid to Redtail, although they could sponsor the show. That'd be okay.
That'd be all right.
But factually, they do integrate right now very easily with Firelight, so you can pull client information over. So that's a great consideration to look at.
Which also integrates with Holistaplan, I believe, which is a tax software, which also integrates with. So the more you can get to talk to each other, the better. It's never perfect.
Yep.
You're never going to get one software that talks to everything, but the more you can do there, that creates scale. I think kind of backing up a little bit, one key differentiator here that I've noticed when talking to newer minted advisors, 65 licensed advisors, is you're also changing. You're going to a different type of relationship with that end client. Mm-hmm. So you're going from what I'll call transaction, where some cases you may speak to somebody once and never again or very infrequently. You're moving into the good news, reoccurring revenue stream. Still good news in my opinion. You have to maintain a really strong and ongoing relationship with every single client. So you've got to go in eyes wide open and be prepared for that, because that is a shift, and it requires work. It requires a good CRM. It requires thoughtful outreach. It requires
forethought.
Yes.
Back to when you said the process. Yeah.
And developing a process is critical. And once again, the good news is you have all sorts of resources to lean on, whether it's other advisors that have walked the walk, whether it's the complete advisor, groups like you, Dennis. We even have an in-house library of kind of step-by-step, a generic process.
What do you, one of the things, I was just reflecting back on something you had said, and it reminds me of a quote that I've always liked, where, you can't be a prophet in your own land. Have you ever heard that one?
No, it's a good one.
Well, so, the Old Testament prophets, Catholic school, right? So the Old Testament prophets, they would go to a different land because to be a prophet, and you would, you're coming now with the word. It's like, no, but that's Eric. We used to play, kick the can. I'm not listening to him. You go somewhere else, it's like, oh, that's Eric. So the point which you're wondering what's the point.
Yeah.
Going back to your existing clients who have only known you in one role, that's got to be a little bit of a communication challenge of, wait, you're my life guy, and now you're talking to me about REITs or crypto or God forbid.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the exciting part. And this is, to me, what really excites me about this universe is folks that maybe have done, and keep going back to just insurance, but let's just use that as our example. You know what they're great at? Getting in front of people and talking to them.
Yep.
Their competition on the other side of the fence that does investments only, they're horrible at marketing. So huge advantage to this group. Now all you really need to figure out is how to mold that story to go back to that group. And in my mind, it's pretty easy. Your toolbox got bigger. You do have to convince them you know what you're doing, but your toolbox just got bigger. You want to be able to bring them a holistic approach. That's why the planning software is so critical. I want to be able to bring everything together. You've got one person driving everything who has vision into everything that you're doing with one design. Well, that could flex, but really one design. We're trying to get you to whatever that goal is, retirement. And I can do it all for you. In the past, you've parsed that out to a number of different people, and nobody's talking to each other.
Yeah.
How effective is that?
Do you see in your experience when somebody becomes a newly minted 65, I would imagine that when they first come in, their investment selections are probably pretty narrow until they become more nuanced.
I would argue you should probably come in that way.
Yeah.
The nice part about working with us is it's going to feel really large at first. Your options are going to feel big, and that's why I go back to investment philosophy. Nobody says your investment philosophy can't morph and change and evolve. Everything in our industry is morphing and changing and evolving all the time. And it's really based on your background knowledge. As you continue to learn, maybe fixed income starts making sense as a part of the puzzle. But the nice part about how we're structured is we will find a set of solutions that you can wrap your head around out of the gates without overcomplicating it, giving you all the answers to the test beforehand, so you know what this thing's supposed to do in different environments. Again, going back to knowing when this thing's going to have headwinds or tailwinds, and you can feel confident. And then you build on that.
Yeah.
This is not going to happen rapidly. You just have to slowly build over time, and it starts clicking and clicking and clicking. And I'd say that's the biggest hurdle for new folks is trusting investments will do what they're supposed to do. And wrapping their head around that. If you can get beyond that, things start getting easy pretty quick.
So we've talked about the things that you need to do. What are some things from your experience working with new people where you don't have to, of course, name names like, oh, that's Steve, that's Steve Smith. Where you've seen from your experience where you've looked and you're like, no, that's not going to, any red flags when you bump it, red flags maybe behavior or where you're like, you either need to correct that or you're not going to last long.
Yeah, there's a number of them. Trying to eat the whole elephant right out of the gates is impossible in our industry. I've been in this industry over, almost 2 decades, more than 2 decades probably, and I still don't know everything. The landscape is vast and huge, and you learn stuff all the time. So trying to learn too much too fast is a huge problem. You just get stuck. 2, the first, I'll call it $5 million is really hard. It's frustrating. It's different. You've got to do paperwork. It doesn't feel like much.
Different paperwork.
Yeah. It just doesn't feel like it's moving the needle the same way your other business does.
Yeah.
And then I see it all the time. People get to $5 million, and it's like, okay, that's maybe paying some of the bills. It's paying some of the overhead. It's paying for maybe the marketing.
I can see it now.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Then they'll hit roughly, call it 20 million, and it starts to really matter. Then they'll hit 30 million, and it starts to feel really good. Now you're clicking on all cylinders and getting revenue from a couple of different places, but the reoccurring revenue really starts to get attractive.
Yeah.
So that time period takes commitment to the process, and takes commitment to getting educated, and takes commitment to actually giving time to that space. And if you can't or aren't willing to, you're going to get stuck under 5 million forever, and just be frustrated.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you your final piece of advice for people? And I wrote one down that you said when we were off camera.
You did?
I did.
Wonder what it was.
I'll show you. This is the note
Which
I
one
took.
was it?
If you can read my handwriting.
My vision is horrible. I can't read that.
Oh,
you
man.
have horrible handwriting.
I do have that's awfully rude to the host of the show.
Apologies.
How important is it to do the work?
It's everything. You have to be willing to do the work. The nice part of it is you have tons and tons of resource. So as long as you're willing to tune in, take some notes, pay attention, join study groups, you just need to get that first lift off. And like I said, the first $5 million feels like torture because you're just not making a ton of money off it.
Yeah.
But if you can dedicate and get that lift and get beyond 5 million, get to 15 million, get to 20 million, 30, it really starts to matter. And it I see it every time. It transforms the practice when they hit roughly, call it 20 to 30 million. Mm-hmm. The practice transforms and evolves right before your very eyes, and it's really cool to watch people that I can rattle off probably 20 advisors we know that started with 5 million or less, and now are 50, 100, getting up there, and they're a different practice than they were when we started.
Love it. That is a perfect spot. I have sheets of questions here, but that's where we'll stop this time. You have to come back. You've got to come back.
I enjoyed it.
All right. So it was a good time.
It was a good time.
Okay. So for everybody out there, thank you so much for joining us. Keep an eye out. If you get a chance, we'd love it if you'd subscribe or follow the show. Also, what would be awesome I read the comments. Also rate us. That would be great too.
Rate Dennis.
No, the show. Rate Eric. Rate the show. Don't hold the show. Don't hold me against the show. But if you get a chance, if there's a topic you would like us to cover or dive into, or get a subject matter expert like Eric on, let me know. I read the comments and we'll go from there. But Eric, thank you so much for being here. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks. It was fun.